Hello everyone, it's Liv here, aka Story Minded, and I'm going to be talking about my Bloody Shakespeare Assignment 1. Bloody Shakespeare was a module where we got a chance to look at Shakespeare's history plays. So over the course of our module we had to study 4 history plays, King Richard II, Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, and then Henry V. For assignment 1, I decided to go for the creative option. So even if at university you choose to just go down an English literature route rather than having English literature and creative writing, something that I love and a lot of universities seem to offer this opportunity, is that you actually have the chance to answer on more creative questions. For some of the traditional essays, like for the larger essays, usually you'll have to do some form of comparison, which is kind of standard in literature anyway. But with this first assignment, there was a creative option, so I decided to give it a go, and we were able to invent our own beginning scene before one of the plays, and I decided to go for King Richard II, which was the first play we studied, because I felt it was best suited to this assignment, and also it was, I didn't want to use it for the bigger essay later on in the year. Like, I didn't want to have to compare it, because one of the other sort of stipulations that we had for our course was that we had to cover at least 3 of the plays in all of our assignments. So we had to end up using 3 of the plays we studied for, like, across the assignments. So because I used King Richard II on the first one, I wasn't able to use him in the second one, which worked out better for me. So I'm just going to read the sort of play script that I ended up writing. I managed to get a first on this essay, which I was really pleased with. We had to create like a beginning scene, like invent a scene for the beginning of the play, and then we had to do like a reflective criticism on our creative choices and link it in. What I really loved about our lecturer for this particular module, apart from the fact that she's amazing, she's just incredible, what I really enjoyed about this module was the fact that the concepts that we had the chance to explore. The whole premise of the history plays is to do with blood, and that's to do with like not only violence and war and the ideas of chivalry, but we also got to look at the idea of blood in terms of family ties and maternity, and there's just the whole sort of premise was a really interesting concept to approach the plays with. And I just loved having the opportunity to create something, especially as I've not really attempted to write play scripts before. And the second part of it was we had to sort of critically analyse what we'd done, and I ended up talking about the iambic pentameter, which I ended up not quite achieving because I'm just rubbish at like writing an iambic pentameter. I gave it my best shot, had a friend ask for their advice, and they were like, oh yeah, this is iambic pentameter, and it's like, it turned out not to be. But I also talked about the stage directions I used, because stage directions are so often overlooked in plays. Like when students study plays, they rarely comment on the stage directions, and they're so important because they give you so much meaning. And even the sequence and the order that the actors come in on stage, it's so significant. So if you're studying plays, please pay attention to the stage directions, because you get so much from it and so much context and understanding. And even the settings as well. The settings are also really important for plays. But apart from the sort of little mishap with the iambic pentameter, everything else went really well. And our lecturer was really helpful because she said she would rather we just use one piece of secondary criticism to tie in with our essays, rather than having reams and reams of research that just aren't utilised. So I ended up applying a piece of research to do with the ideas of chivalry, because for the character I wrote about, Bolingbroke, who later on, Bolingbroke ends up becoming King Henry V by the end of the final play. Which, no, he doesn't. Bolingbroke becomes King Henry IV. His son goes on to become King Henry V. A lot of the names get confusing in this. There are so many familial ties, and there's just so much happens. Bolingbroke usurps King Richard II, which leads to his mental breakdown when he becomes King Henry IV. But a lot happens. A lot happens in this play. So for Act 1, Scene 1, I have location, private bedchambers, Windsor Castle, near London. Enter John of Gaunt, that's Bolingbroke's father, who's meant to be a supporter of Richard, followed by his son, Bolingbroke. Gaunt. Peace, peace, my son, thy eyes are full of fire. Wilt thou burn all of fair England, your home? Wilt thou make a mockery of your cousin's court by reducing it to a pit fit only for bear-baiting? Prithee, answer me, Henry. Bolingbroke presses Gaunt's shoulders. Noble father, prithee sit. Allow me to banish these baseless fears. Fire thou rightly detects, but thy aim like a first-time lancer is off. Mine eyes burn for injustice alone. So to give a bit of context to this, the whole sort of premise of King Richard II is that it appears that he has a very stable court, with loyal supporters, loyal followers. But there's this kind of, when Shakespeare created these plays, he used the Holinshed Chronicles for historical detail, because Shakespeare's writing about the past and then obviously dramatising it. So there's a lot of interesting conversations we had surrounding taking history and then presenting it on stage. Something that was really interesting was that there's a murder that happens, and off the top of my head, I can't remember who got murdered, but a person of Richard's court got murdered, and there's a lot of rumours surrounding the fact that they believed one of his men or King Richard himself was the murderer. So Bolingbroke is trying to cause disorder in the court by challenging Thomas Mowbray, who is supposedly the man that, if King Richard himself didn't murder him, he ordered Thomas Mowbray to kill this person. It's all to do with politics and complex issues. So Bolingbroke wants to basically overthrow King Richard II while making it look like he's defending King Richard II's honour, and it's he's a very performative character. He's very interesting. I really loved Bolingbroke, but that's just to give a bit of context for that. So the whole injustice thing is that he's angry about this kind of deception that's gone on. Gaunt placed his hand on Bolingbroke's shoulders. Fie, if thou cannot voice thy intent here, then where? My sole son, if we share blood, we share truth. Bolingbroke steps backwards and clasps his gage. Truth? The truth is something you cannot face. Long flown are the days since your brother's death, long before God had graced me with his breath. That's it, it's Gloucester. Gloucester, who was Gaunt's brother, is the man who was supposedly murdered. Obviously, some events are fictionalised because Shakespeare played with history, so not everything that happened. But there was definitely some kind of murder, and it was Gloucester who was supposedly murdered. Do not strike me with your thunderous frown when I know the murderer wears a crown. Gaunt, hush, hasty youth. How freely your tongue releases treason. To think of my brother, my blood runs cold. Not since our fall has a plot been so bold, but to challenge the king is to beg for death. Bolingbroke, father, you insult me before hearing me. In my cousin's court, treason grows like weeds. It is rampant, and no stone is left spared. Who but I can hold honour's trembling hand? Gaunt, it is not your place to do so. Honour rests her weary head in God's lap. Our oaths bound us to Richard, you know this. And that's another thing that I love about these plays. There's a lot to do with oaths and chivalry, and Gaunt is of the old ways. He's very torn because although his brother has been murdered, he is very much of the view that God is the ultimate judge, and the idea of the divine right of kings, that they used to believe that God, that the king or the monarch in power is God's mouthpiece or sort of like vessel on earth, and therefore they're there by divine right, so you can't actually challenge their authority, which is then when you get into the whole Restoration period and where people were really angry and they tried to like fight back against the royalists and try and overturn it, but then you had the Restoration period where the monarchy is back in power. So it is interesting. I love the Renaissance period. It's so complex and it's just really fun to learn about. Oh yeah, sorry, I've read that bit. Bolingbroke. Shall God descend from the heavens, father? Shall he pick up sword and slice Richard through? My oaths may be to Richard, but my duty to serve England is greater. When shall your treacherous tongue fall mute? Sorry, that goes to Gaunt. Bolingbroke placed his hand on hilt. This sword shall be in place of my tongue. May heaven's grace alone serve as my shield. I intend to challenge the Duke of Norfolk. That's Mowbray. There's so many titles to do with like dukes and lords, and there's just so many. But Duke of Norfolk is Thomas Mowbray, who Bolingbroke wants to challenge because he's supposedly the one who killed Duke of Gloucester. Mowbray, like the serpent, was at the core of the Duke of Gloucester's unlawful death. Gaunt. So the king shall remain upon his throne. Bolingbroke. Indeed, sweet seeds of flattery I'll sow. First, I shall wish him years of happiness, present myself as a loving subject, whose sole interest is to safeguard my prince. Once planted this notion of devotion, the blooms of my tongue shall wither away, and transformed by use of whetstone, shall I... that bit's been cut off. I shall have to find that other bit, but that bit's been cut off. What I'll do is I'll find that bit and I'll add it in on the video. First, I shall wish him years of happiness, present myself as a loving subject, whose sole interest is to safeguard my prince. Once planted this notion of devotion... Oh wait, oh no, sorry, it's here. It's duplicated, right. Shall I thrust with deadly aim accusations at Thomas Mowbray? Gaunt rises from bed. Oh, Harry, how your sharp tongue wounds my soul. If only I could douse your inner fires. The blood of my father runs through your veins. You are my heir and precious legacy. Heed my title well, for one day you shall bear its weight, and my estate will be yours. Bolingbroke hugs Gaunt. Lancaster, who's also Gaunt, it's John of Gaunt, but he's Duke of Lancaster. Nothing would honour me more. For this to succeed, I need your support. Though your nephew ignores your sound counsel, which is a big thing about King Richard II, he doesn't listen to any advice, which gets him into trouble later on when he's usurped by Bolingbroke. He will employ you to maintain control. May my disobedience go unchecked. Gaunt. To fail in my fatherly duty will raise suspicion within your cousin. Court is no place for the violence of man. If God's will is just, no blood will be spilt. Lots of blood is spilt. My brother would forgive, not seek vengeance. Bolingbroke. I acknowledge the strain I put on you. May God make Richard atone for his sins. How much sweeter would England's soils be? Gaunt. Speak is plain. How would these soils be sweet? Bolingbroke. They would be parched of blood. Gaunt. To know your desires match my own. Relief floods through my heart like a river. Your future sons will tread a blood-free path. Bolingbroke. That is my hope, and one I hope you see. Alas, Mowbray must pay for what he's done. He may be an instrument of the king, but the coward willingly played his part. How can a sworn knight be so black of heart? Gaunt. To defy the king is to beg for death. Have I not in a different dress warned this? Bolingbroke. The only dress I see are those of widows. Gaunt strikes Bolingbroke's ear. You mock me now as you possess a head. Try your foolish tongue wagging when you're dead. Bolingbroke. Fools are those who allow traitors to rule. Gaunt. Hereford you are, Lancaster you're not. So Hereford is currently Bolingbroke's title because he's not yet Duke of Lancaster, which he would inherit after his father's death. Servant knocks on door. Duke of Lancaster, the king summons you. Gaunt. I shall cover as my conscience allows. Follow soon, my son. Gaunt exits. So that's the end of that assignment, basically. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to comment below. Bye.